Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a bit different. We've got three really distinct perspectives on how humans organize themselves.
Hmm.
One's focused on, strict behavior management, like in schools.
Hmm.
Another digs deep into organizational equity. And the third, it's looking at global social psychology.
And we're kind of smashing them together, aren't we?
Exactly. The mission here is to figure out how leaders actually deliberately build a group culture that, well, works. One that's functional, strong, and fundamentally fair.
That's the core challenge, finding those common levers. We're looking for the shared architecture, you could say, that determines if a culture succeeds, whether it's, I don't know, a big company, a school, or even just your local community group.
Right.
We need to pull together the principles that create effective order, but also mesh them with the principles demanding fairness and, yeah, flexibility too.
And looking through these sources, you really see this massive tension emerge, don't you? It's like the human need for clear rules versus our need for individuality, for justice. So today, we're going to unpack the science behind why groups can be so strict about rules,
Well,
look at what's non-negotiable for consistency, and really nail down why true equity has to be the foundation for any culture that hopes to last. Let's jump in.
okay.
So let's start with the basics. Source one, which looks at school leadership, gives us a really straightforward definition of culture. It's simply the way we do things around here.
Yeah, nice and simple.
But the crucial point it makes right away is that a good culture, that's never an accident. Leadership has to consciously create it, be visible. They have to, write the script for how things should be done.
And that idea, designing consistency, it leads us straight into this really key academic framework from Michele Gelfand. It's all about the psychology of tight and loose cultures.
High loose cultures. Okay.
What's really fascinating, and you hinted at this, is that it seems to be a kind of fractal pattern.
Fractal. How so?
Well, the same basic principles apply everywhere. The rules that govern how a whole nation reacts in a crisis. They're fundamentally similar to the rules governing how a small team tries to hit a deadline. It scales.
I love that fractal idea, the same pattern repeating at different levels. So, okay, walk us through Gelfand's definitions.
Right.
What makes a culture tight or loose?
So tight cultures are the ones with really strong social norms. That means lots of detailed rules, explicit or implicit, and crucially, very low tolerance for anyone who steps outside those norms.
Okay, so conformity is highly valued.
Extremely. The group demands it. Loose cultures, on the other hand, they have weaker norms, fewer rules maybe, and definitely a much higher tolerance for people doing their own thing, for deviance.
Makes sense.
And norms, just to be clear, whether they're tight or loose, they're the social tools we use to coordinate, to get along, to reduce friction in our interactions.
Got it. So if we connect that back to source one, the school leadership guide, we see tightness in action, right? It says successful schools often have leaders who are very visible, an almost obsessive focus on consistency, and incredibly detailed expectations for behavior. Granular stuff.
Yeah, we're not just talking about vague mission statements hanging on a wall somewhere.
No.
This is about deliberately designing specific routines, things that need to be done exactly the same way most, if not all, of the time.
Like what kind of things? Give us some examples.
Oh, like having specific rules about which side of the corridor you walk down, precise routines for lining up for lunch, demanding complete silence during assemblies.
Wow, that detail.
Even down to things like doing regular stationary checks to make sure every student is prepared. It's about removing variables.
But why? Why go to that level of, control? What's the real payoff?
Well, source one really drills down on this. When leaders enforce that kind of discipline and predictability,
Yeah.
they're actually boosting psychological safety. And that turns out to be the hidden engine behind staff feeling secure, doing their best work, and sticking around.
Ah, psychological safety. Okay, I see the connection now. It's not just about quiet corridors.
Exactly. The payoff is huge. Better student behavior, obviously, which correlates strongly with better academic and social outcomes, but also much higher staff satisfaction and, critically for many organizations, better staff retention.
Because people feel safer, less
Well,
anxious.
Precisely. A predictable, orderly culture reduces anxiety. It lets people focus on their main job, whether that's teaching or coding or manufacturing. When that consistency breaks down, the culture starts to fray. People feel unsafe.
Okay, so consistency and tightness bring order, safety, better retention. Sounds pretty good. Where does this system start to, run into trouble? Or what causes it in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why does a culture become tight? And the answer, according to Gelfand's work, the core driver behind all of this is Threat.
Threat. Wow, okay, that's a big claim.
Yeah.
Unpack that connection for us. Threat leads to tightness.
Yeah, the research is pretty compelling. Historically, the main reason cultures developed tight norms was because they faced significant threats to their survival.
Like what sort of threats?
Think about things that endanger the whole group. Major natural disasters happening repeatedly, chronic famine, severe resource scarcity, constant threat of invasion.
Right, things where you absolutely need everyone to pull together, follow the rules, just to survive.
Exactly. When the stakes are literally life and death, you simply can't afford to have people deviating from the plan. Coordination is paramount. Tightness becomes a survival mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense for historical threats, but what about now? Does it still apply?
It does, but here's where it gets more complex, and the sources really highlight this. The threat doesn't have to be, an imminent invasion anymore. It can be entirely subjective.
Subjective threat, meaning?
Meaning when people perceive a threat, maybe high crime rates they see on the news,
Yeah.
an economic downturn, political instability, even things like feeling overcrowded, their minds instinctively tighten.
So feeling unsafe makes us want more rules.
Yes, it's a psychological reflex. That feeling creates this almost desperate desire for stronger rules, maybe harsher punishments for rule breakers, and often support for leaders who seem tough and promise to restore order.
You can certainly see that playing out sometimes.
Absolutely. Think about the global reaction after 9/11. A massive perceived threat led many societies to accept, even demand, a tightening of rules around security, privacy, even social discourse.
Right, but you're saying this impulse for tightness, even if it comes from wanting safety, has a downside.
Always. There's always a cost. Gelfand calls it the tight-loose trade-off.
Okay, let's spend some time on that trade-off. This feels really crucial for leaders. What are the main downsides of being too tight?
Well, while tight cultures give you that order, that coordination, high levels of self-control among individuals, they really struggle with innovation. They tend to be less creative.
Why is that?
Because they're resistant to new ideas, anything that deviates from the established norm, they suffer from what you might call cultural inertia. It's just really hard to change a system with deeply ingrained, strictly enforced rules, even if those rules aren't working anymore.
Okay, so too tight means stagnant, resistant to change. What about the other end? What's the risk of being too loose?
Well, the flip side is that loose cultures are generally more creative, more open, more adaptable, but they risk becoming disorganized, unpredictable,
Uh-huh.
and potentially spinning into chaos. There's a sociological term for this, anomie.
Anomie. What's that exactly?
Anomie is when the social norms become so weak or maybe so contradictory that people just don't know how to behave anymore. They don't know what to expect from others. It's a breakdown of social structure.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine, say, a tech startup that grows incredibly fast. They hire hundreds of people in just a few months, but don't put clear communication channels or decision-making processes in place. That sudden lack of structure, that center cannot hold feeling, that's anatomy. And it can kill productivity and morale just as effectively as having way too many rules.
So it really sounds like there's a kind of Goldilocks principle at play here for cultures.
That's a great way to put it. Groups really suffer if they swing too far either way, too tight. You risk oppression, stagnation, maybe even higher rates of social distress like suicide, Gelfand found.
Wow.
Too loose. You get unpredictability, inefficiency, maybe chaos. The goal is finding that dynamic balance, the just right spot.
And that sweet spot might be different depending on the organization's purpose, right?
Exactly. The balance depends on what you need to do. An organization where safety is paramount, think like, I don't know, a pharmaceutical company or an airline.
Yeah, you need tight rules there.
You absolutely need tightness in core operations. Strict adherence to protocols is non-negotiable. They need what you might call flexible tightness. Tight where it matters, maybe looser elsewhere.
Okay. And the opposite.
Well, think of maybe an advertising agency or a design firm. They thrive on creativity, discretion, trying new things. They need more looseness, but it needs to be structured looseness so creativity doesn't just dissolve into everyone doing their own thing with no coordination.
Right. Structured looseness.
Yeah.
I like that. And this isn't just about big organizations, is it? Does it apply to families, communities?
Oh, absolutely. Gelfand's data shows this pattern repeats. For example, working-class families often tend to have tighter cultures
Why is that?
because they often experience more direct environmental threats, things like poverty, job insecurity, less margin for error if something goes wrong. So for them, stricter adherence to rules within the family can be a necessary strategy for survival, for avoiding crisis.
That really brings it home. Okay, so we've dug deep into order, control, the role of threat. This is essential groundwork. But now we have to make a pivot, don't we?
We do.
Because we've established order is vital, but it has to be balanced with fairness. If the rules aren't perceived as fair or aren't applied fairly, the whole culture can break down. So let's turn to the challenge of equity.
Yes, and this is where source 2, the one focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion, becomes absolutely critical. And the first thing we need to do is get really clear on the difference between equality and equity. They sound similar, but they're not the same.
Okay, break it down for us. Equality versus equity.
Equality means giving everyone the exact same thing, the same resources, the same support. It's a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Sounds fair on the surface.
It can seem fair, but equity. Equity means distributing resources based on the needs of the recipients. It acknowledges that people start from different places and need different things to reach a fair outcome.
So you actually have to treat people differently to be truly fair.
Sometimes, yes. The classic example is in education. Giving every student the exact same textbook is equality. But providing a student with a learning disability with, say, an audio version of the book or extra time on a test, that's equity. It's giving them what they need to have a fair shot.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. And how does this clash with that idea of tightness we just discussed?
Well, this is where it gets really challenging. Source 3 points out a pretty uncomfortable reality. Women and people from minority groups often live in tighter worlds than their majority counterparts.
Tighter worlds. What does that mean in practice?
It means they often have less freedom, less latitude in how they behave. The social norms are applied more strictly to them, and the punishments for violating those norms, even minor ones, can be much more severe.
So the culture's tightness isn't applied evenly. It hits some groups harder.
Exactly. The same rule can have a vastly different impact depending on who you are.
That's a huge caution for leaders, isn't it? An organization might feel perfectly safe and orderly to one group, but simultaneously feel hyper-restrictive, maybe even dangerous, to another group within the same organization.
Precisely. Which is why deep self-awareness in leadership is non-negotiable. And Source 2 gives us a really critical insight here. When it comes to discrimination, it's the effect that matters, not the intention.
Say more about that. Effect, not intention.
Well, you might say something with absolutely no intention to cause harm. You might think you're giving a compliment or making an innocent observation, but if that comment lands as a microaggression, if it reinforces a negative stereotype, if it makes someone feel excluded or othered,
then harm was done, regardless of your intent.
Exactly. The impact is what defines it as discriminatory. And leaders, especially, have to get really honest about their own unconscious biases.
Unconscious bias? Like what?
Things like affinity bias, that natural human tendency to gravitate towards people who look, think, or act like us. Or implicit stereotypes, those subconscious associations we have about certain groups. We all have them. The key is recognizing them and actively working against them.
And the source also mentions something called ordinary privilege. What's that about?
Privilege isn't just about having advantages like wealth or status. It's also, maybe even more importantly, about what you don't have to deal with.
What you don't have to put up with.
Yeah, like maybe you don't have to constantly explain your name or your hairstyle. Maybe you don't have your qualifications questioned in a meeting. Maybe you don't have to worry about your safety walking home alone at night. That absence of barriers and burdens, that's ordinary privilege. And recognizing it is key to understanding the different realities people experience.
And we also have to talk about intersectionality here, don't we?
Absolutely critical. That term, coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, helps us understand that aspects of identity like race, gender, class, sexual orientation, disability don't exist in isolation.
They overlap.
They overlap and interact. So the discrimination faced by, say, a Black woman isn't just the sum of racism plus sexism. It's a unique, often intensified form of bias that exists at that specific intersection. Leaders need to grasp that complexity.
So understanding all this bias, privilege, intersectionality, how does that translate into action for leaders?
It means moving towards a truly compassionate and trauma-informed approach to leadership, recognizing that systemic discrimination, everyday microaggressions, harassment, these things aren't just isolated incidents.
They add up.
They accumulate. They add to the psychological burden, the trauma that many individuals carry, and that burden directly impacts their ability to thrive, to contribute, to feel safe in the culture you're trying to build.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together now. We've covered tightness for order, the dangers of being too tight or too loose, and the absolute necessity of equity. How do these synthesize?
So if we bring all three sources together, the picture that emerges is this. A really successful, robust culture needs deliberate tightness in its core routines. Those clear expectations from source one, the consistent rules, they create essential order and predictability.
Right, the foundation.
But, and this is crucial, that order has to be constantly balanced with structured looseness. You need space for creativity, for adaptation, for individual needs. You can't be rigid everywhere.
The Goldilocks principle again.
Exactly. And underpinning all of that, the absolute bedrock must be equity. Driven by leaders who are self-aware, who understand bias and privilege, and who hold themselves and others accountable for creating fair systems. That's pulling from sources 2 and 3.
And the key to making it all stick seems to be that consistency and visibility from source one. Leaders can't just set the rules, they have to live them, reinforce them constantly.
Every single day, visibility is huge. Modeling the behavior, addressing inconsistencies quickly. The moment leaders let that consistency slip, the culture starts to erode, and that feeling of threat can creep back in.
And it's not just on leaders, is it? The sources suggest everyone has a role.
Absolutely. Source 2 talks about specific actions everyone can take, like being an upstander. Yeah, not just a bystander. Someone who sees wrongdoing, sees inequity, and actually speaks out or intervenes rather than just letting it slide.
Takes courage.
It does. And also being an effective ally. That means consciously using whatever position or privilege you have to support and amplify the voices of those who are marginalized or have less power in the system.
So it's about active participation in maintaining fairness.
Yes. Real leadership at any level involves making those conscious choices to act based on this understanding of fairness and equity every single time. It's an ongoing process.
This has been, well, quite a journey. We've gone from the tiny details of school corridor rules all the way to the global psychology of threat and landed on the deep requirements of personal accountability and equity. It really shows culture as this complex architecture built on managing tensions. Thanks for walking us through it all.
It was my pleasure. It's challenging stuff, but so important. And maybe I can leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to chew on.
Please do.
If we accept Gelfand's idea that the perception of threat is the main psychological driver that makes a culture tighten up,
Okay.
and we also accept, as Source 3 shows, that this tightness often hits marginalized groups the hardest, creating those tighter worlds for them,
Right.
then maybe the ultimate leadership challenge isn't just about managing the consequences of tightness and looseness. Maybe it's about asking, how can we intentionally work to reduce the perception of threat within our organization?
So tackle the root cause.
Exactly. If we can lower that perceived threat, can we create more psychological safety, more space for the kind of equitable, compassionate, and creative loose behaviors we want to see flourish? Can we build trust instead of just managing fear?
That is a powerful question. Moving beyond managing rules to actively reducing the fear that creates the need for such rigid rules in the first place. Lots to think about there. How can you apply that Goldilocks principle, flexible tightness, structured looseness, all built on equity in your world? Join us next time for another deep dive.